the greatest inspiration that I'm getting is from nature, actually. So my most recent
Hannes Bieger is one of the heavyweights of the Berlin techno scene. Today, he's with us to chat about music, his creative process, and some stuff he's been working on lately. How have you been received in Buenos Aires? What's the vibe like with the public?
For me, it's always really, really special to come here. I think the first time I visited was in 2014, so that's many, many years ago. And for me, it's always super, super nice to come back because I like it a lot, and I have so many friends here, which I made over the years, and yeah, so it's always a really special thing for me to come here.
It's nice. You are a friend with Ernesto.
Yes, I mean, we share a very, very similar interest, I think, in the instruments that we're using and the way how we sometimes maybe even think about music. And I mean, he's such a nice person and also such an interesting person. Like there's always something to talk about to him, and yeah, I really like seeing him every time I'm here. Yes.
Well, that's nice.
The first time we actually met in my studio in Berlin, and he because he was visiting, and then he came over, and um,
So he was touring there in Berlin.
I don't remember why he was there, but he was there. It was really really nice to meet him there, and then the next time we met here, but that was many years ago.
Well, so this time you played in Obok. What is your live set like? For the people who don't know, they look at the wall and they see all that kind of buttons and synthesizers.
Well, when I started to play live again in 2018, and by the way, I played at the Bow at the end of 2018, and that was one of the very first few shows after I restarted my career as a live artist. Before I played in Berlin, and I think in Oslo, in Norway, and then the Bow probably was my third show after I started playing live again. So it's important part of the history here for me. And yeah, I was before I started to make music again and started to play live again. I was only working at the studio behind the scenes, and for like 10, 11 years as an engineer and producer with so many amazing artists. And people knew me for the sound quality that I made. And so when I decided to play live again, my idea was that I wanted to bring the good sound that I could make at the studio to the stage. And so I decided that I couldn't use some small little plastic boxes to make music. I wanted to bring real instruments, and this is what I'm still doing. Like it's uh, uh, a lot of stuff. It's two maletas bastante pesados con sintetizadores, and it's heavy and it's a lot of stuff to carry around. But I think for me that's the way how I like to make music. Also because my first instrument was guitar, and I played in rock bands for a long time. And so for me, making music always was a really physical experience, holding an instrument in my hand. And so I wanted to travel with a proper Moog synthesizer, for example, also because I just like the power of the sound. And so some people sometimes say, yeah, it's only live, and so we have to compromise because we have to fit our equipment in hand luggage and stuff like that. But for me, it's not only live. For me, it's maybe even more important than studio because it's where you really share the sound experience with other people. And so, yeah, my goal ever since has been to not cut any corners and do it the proper way.
What kind of music inspires you
Mm,
now and when you started?
well, when I started, like I said, I learned guitar and I played guitar in rock bands, and it was mostly, I would say, English rock music from the 60s and 70s that inspired me when I started. It's like I listened to a lot of Beatles and Pink Floyd
Hmm.
and Rolling Stones and Led Zeppelin and all this kind of stuff. And later, this changed more to electronic music. I started playing shows and started producing in the 90s, and that was such a great time for music because there was so much happening with like even in rock music with Nirvana and Pearl Jam and all this kind of stuff. And Lenny Kravitz was a huge influence for me at the time because he did this super nice retro sounding stuff with Henry Hirsch, the producer and bassist and keyboard player that he used to work with at the time. And uh, yeah, then in electronic music, there was all this kind of breakbeat, trip hop stuff that I was interested in. And straight bass drums only came into my life a little later. I moved to Berlin at the end of the 90s, and then I started to make deep house also, like with a straight bass drum, because in Berlin, the straight bass drum, you can't just escape it, you know? But I wasn't into techno so much at the time. For me, it was more deep house, and what I loved a lot was Metro Area, for example, some French stuff like Etienne de Crécy and Naked Music, a label from San Francisco. This stuff I liked a lot. F Communications, Masters at Work. That was the kind of music with a straight bass drum that got me interested. And over the years, this obviously evolved and changed. And now, yeah, working more in the field of progressive house and melodic techno. And yeah, obviously there's a lot of inspiration in that field also, but I have to say that I try not to get inspired too much by other electronic music because I don't want to get into the cycle where you just kind of repeat what everybody else is also doing. And I think the greatest inspiration that I'm getting is from nature, actually. So my most recent EP, the Playa Perdida, which just came out on Bedrock, I wrote in my mind, not even with an instrument, but I had the music in my mind when I was in Bali and I was staying in a very lonely beach area, and I was just sitting there by the ocean and looking out onto the waves, and then the music started to kind of materialize in my mind. And
That's interesting from a creative perspective. Do you have your notebook or laptop there to download your ideas in the middle of nature, in the middle of the beach?
yes, I mean, I didn't have the laptop at the beach at first. So what I did is, and I also have to say this only happens to me when I take breaks from making music, when I take breaks from leaving from working at the studio, because when I'm at the studio, there's music every day and so many hours, and the music in my head only starts to come out when there has been silence for a while. And for that, staying beside the ocean is great with all the noise from the waves and no music. And then at some point, the music comes back in my mind. And so what I'm normally doing is that I'm just taking a couple notes and I write down a couple melodies and grooves and ideas and descriptions of the feeling that I had while thinking about the music. And then at some point later, I start to look at the notes and start to work on it. And in that example, I didn't start working on it right away in Bali, but I went to India afterwards to play a tour, and then two of the shows got cancelled, and I had a bit of extra time, and so I was just sitting in the hotel room and I was unpacking my live equipment, which is like a small studio that I'm traveling with, so to speak. And then I started to make the track a few days later when I was in India.
Well, you said something interesting that silence is an important part of music. It's something, sometimes it's not about filling every space in time, but also have some equilibrium between silence and noise.
I mean, one can't be there without the other. You know, it's like the day can't exist without the night, and it's really, for me, I have to say. I mean, you can look at this in so many different ways. You can also, like, one thing that I've been saying for a long time is that I think it's a good idea to learn how to listen before you start to speak. You know, it's uh, there's so much information and noise and talk and chatter everywhere all the time, and the attention spans get so short, and people are on their phones all the time and just checking reels, and uh, it's crazy how much information there is in the world and how many different things we are exposed to every day. And
But
so
music nowadays reflects that kind of noise that we experience every day.
yes, but for me it's important to take a step back and kind of leave this super fast cycle. And for me with Playa Perdida, this again, it was a great experience because I thought I have to let this happen more often. That my mind is so empty from music that the music comes back by itself. It's the best thing, and it doesn't happen when you're constantly focusing on stuff. You really need to tune out and let it go, and then it will come from itself.
Yeah, I think sometimes you have to take a step back to see things with some objectivity so that you can think outside of the box, being outside of the loop. And another thing, I think so many people wonder when they see your studio, are you do you consider yourself a music producer or a sound engineer or both?
I'm both, and first and foremost, I would say I'm a musician because this is how I started, and basically when I started producing music for myself, I didn't even think about working with some other engineer. It was more like, okay, I want to produce music, so I have to produce music with everything that is part of the process, and that's what I did. And this is why I started to build my own studio, to make my own stuff and engineer my own productions. And later this became a job for me in a way, but not because I intended to have a career as an engineer, but because I released my own productions, and then people came to me and said, "Oh wow, this sounds really nice, and can you give me the phone number of the engineer who worked on it?" And then I said, "No, sorry, I can't give you the phone number, but only because you're talking to the guy already." And this is kind of how that started. And I didn't really have the plan when I started to become an engineer, but for me, it's now it's really important that I did all these different things in my career, like playing in bands, learning instruments, playing instruments, producing, mixing, arranging, doing mastering. I even wrote about music and music production as a journalist for magazines like Sound on Sound for many years. And uh, yeah, so these days, whenever I work with anything music related, I can do this with the experience of having done all these different things. And so, yeah, when I'm offering my studio work as a service, of course, you could say that the basis of it is mixing. But for me, the idea is that because I can do it and I have the experience. I'm not saying I'm only turning EQ and reverb knobs. I'm basically giving advice on how to finish the music in the best possible way. And sometimes this is just a little bit of mixing, but sometimes this is also working on the arrangement a bit and stuff like that. And so I think having done all these different things and having had these experiences really, really helps.
And you were self-taught, or you went to you made a career from sound engineer or music production?
Uh, no, I'm basically self-taught, which also has to do with the fact that when I started, I mean, now there's uh, YouTube and internet, and you can ask AI any questions and stuff like that. And there's so much information and so many different ways how to learn stuff and how to figure it out. But when I started with all of this, there was no YouTube and was. Not the we didn't have the possibility to see a video of somebody doing what we wanted to learn and then understand this much quicker. We had to figure it out ourselves, and also I think yeah, it's important to go through this process because it really helps you form your handwriting or your creative voice as an artist to have to deal with obstacles and problems, and sometimes it's not good when the solution is just three mouse clicks away. It's better to find it out yourself because you then learn it in a much better way.
I think that's a lot of motivations for a lot of producers who don't know where to start. And today you have like a lot of information everywhere, and the technology is advancing so fast that techniques in mixing and mastering, it's hard to keep it up. So that having some testimony of self-taught producer and engineer, it's, I think, very important.
I think it's also important because it's so complex. It's when you think about sitting in the studio and making a track. You're the composer, you're the artist, you're the musician, you're the arranger, you're the sound engineer, and this used to be like in traditional productions. These used to be different jobs. So you're really doing the job of five, six, seven, eight, nine, 10 different people at a time, and it's a lot, and people get confused with all this kind of stuff. I'm seeing this with so many of my students that uh, just because the whole thing is very complex and complicated, sometimes the people have difficulties to understand that sometimes it's just very, very simple. The simple things get overlooked so easily because there's so many like multi-band compressor plugins, and every plugin you open has like 30 knobs and controls, and where do you even start? It's and what I'm always trying to do is to find the most simple way of doing something, and this sometimes is a plugin or a hardware unit that only has one knobs or two knobs, and what I'm seeing with so many people is that they use like 10 different very complex plugins on one single sound, and uh, because it's so complex, nobody really turns the knobs themselves. It's just presets, 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 because there's so much stuff that you can't even learn how to use a certain thing. And so what I'm always trying to tell the people is that it's good to try to do it in the simplest way possible, and to really do it from the ground up and one step at a time. And I think it's also a good idea to limit yourself. You don't have to use all the plugins you have. It's like when you produce, maybe you use one drum machine and one or two synthesizers, and you only start using something else when you have the feeling that you really can't do anything new with this anymore. And this is I think how you learn in the best way, and this is how your creative process becomes something that becomes recognizable, because it's not completely random new stuff all the time. you focus on some things and you develop something with these things.
Well, that's interesting because I think a lot of people wonder about what's the best plugin or the best compressor to sound like Hannes. And maybe the question is how I balance my technical side with my creative side. How do you balance yourself, your creative side, and the technical in the studio?
Well, you know this saying like that you need 10,000 hours of doing something to become a master. And I wouldn't go so far and say that I'm a master, but what I'm saying is that I don't have 10,000 hours experience. I probably have 50,000 hours experience of making music in different forms. And what happens when you do this for so long is that ideally, when I'm creating something, I don't even think about the details. You know, it's not like, oh, I want to make a bass drum. I have to think about this. I have to think about this. Ideally, I just do it, and the technology almost becomes invisible in a way because I'm more like a sculptor creating something, and I'm not thinking about the tools that I'm using. I'm thinking about what I'm doing with the tools, and so yeah, I would say there is not one thing that you need to use to sound like me. It's if anything, it's this idea of trying to trying to keep it simple in a way that you don't do too much unnecessary stuff.
Well, you started also in an analog gear environment, but nowadays people work almost 100% in the box, like in digital environments. So, what's your take on working on analog gear and working 100% in the box, or versus a hybrid set?
It's all great, and I think we have a luxury today that we have all these options, you know. And of course, the analog stuff is very important to me because this is how I grew up musically, and I like hardware to create because you can just feel it and turn it and uh, turn different knobs at a time, and you just don't have one mouse on the computer, and you know it's just different. But I'm probably using a lot more software than people think, you know, because it would be stupid to not do it because there's so much good quality stuff today, and in that sense, I've been working in a hybrid studio ever since, you know, and for me, both is important. I wouldn't miss any of it.
For someone who is starting today, who is learning to produce electronic music, is there a difference between producing in a computer or producing 100% in analog gear? It's going to sound better in analog gear.
Mm, it's going to sound different. Analog is not always better, I would say. It really depends. But I think what is going to be different is the way how you make music. And uh, what Bob Moog said, I think, is really important. He talked about this feedback loop in which you can get as a musician when you play your instrument. And so ideally, when you create and you play something on a synth, uh, of course you're the player and you do your stuff, but the instrument also inspires you to do certain things that come out just because you use that instrument. And my experience is that it's much more difficult to get into this kind of feedback loop where the instrument really, really inspires you when you work inside the box. Because, for example, you can't feel the instrument, you can't turn different knobs at it. It's just less intuitive. And so the process is different. And I think sometimes it's could be easier or more fun or more productive to create something with an analog instrument, but then again, when you just look at the pure sound of it, of course, there's digital instruments which sound like a digital instrument, and this is great because this is also an interesting color. But in general, I would say if it's definitely possible to do really good sonic productions just inside the computer, and when you are not able to do that, you're probably also not able to do this with analog stuff. So it's not really the difference today for me is not necessarily the sound itself, it's the way how you use the instruments that makes a difference.
That's nice. And something that it's linked with the previous question is what's your take on learning on digital platforms or digital environments? And I mean with environments like virtual reality, for example.
Um, yeah, it's an interesting thing to explore, and this is why we are launching this new project right now, where I'm doing an online masterclass again, but one that in the end will be a lot more detailed than the one I made a couple years ago. And we have rebuilt my whole studio in virtual reality. And that means when you put the headset on and you do certain exercises, you can do this. Sitting pretty much in the same environment I am sitting in all the time, and this is for me. This is mind blowing, and it's just a different way of getting immersed in music. And yeah, it's still fairly new technology, but yeah, it's just fantastic to explore what's possible with new stuff.
Well, you launched recently your course on a reality. So could you tell us what the platform is about and what you find innovative about it?
Yeah, like I said, it's basically it's like an um part of, or the central part of it, I would say, is an online video based masterclass where I'm explaining my uh, where I'm explaining my techniques and my tools and the way I'm using it, and the philosophy behind it and around it. And then as an add-on, there's AR and VR exercises, and the part this is one big part of the platform, which also basically has a character of a community, with like the possibility for me to do like regular ask me anything sessions with the participants, or where I can share sounds and presets and samples and stems of tracks that I've been doing and stuff like that. And so it's a mixture of all these aspects, which basically, if you take part in it, you have a very nice big window into my musical world and the way how I'm creating, and the way how I'm hopefully able to share my experience with everybody else.
And do you consider it's oriented for newcomer producers or also for advanced producers?
All of that. I mean, a lot of the stuff that I'm sometimes talking about can be fairly advanced and specific. And I think the more you already know, the better you can understand why this matters and why this is important. But also, when I'm doing my in-person master classes, regardless of whether this is at the studio or while I'm touring, I try to keep that accessible for people with all kinds of background knowledge. And so I always try to shape it in a way that uh, you find something really interesting, even when you're a very experienced producer already. But at the same time, I always try and keep it accessible for people who are just starting to get into it.
I took the course, and something that for me is very interesting is to not only being in your studio, it's also being inside your tracks. Like you can play with every stem, see every part of the chain, and the brain creates this illusion of separation when we hear music, but that is something difficult to perceive when you are starting. So having the stems, the different groups in the mixer, it's makes it more easier to learn how to produce and how to mix.
That's great. When you then I think it sounds like we did something right when you have that feeling. It's I'm very very happy to hear that.
Well, and finally, what message would you like to share with those just beginning their journey in music production?
Mm, well, I think what's most important these days is I mean we talked about how complex it all is and how difficult it sometimes may seem and how slow progress may feel and I think what's really really important is to focus yourself and I mean, you will always find, regardless of whether you're just starting or you're more advanced or you're already like an international touring artist, you will always find some people around you who have a better career and who make more money and who play bigger shows and bigger festivals and have more successful releases and all this kind of stuff. And so, like they say, comparison is the thief of joy. You know, it's especially with social media. It's everybody only always talks about the best moments, but nobody talks about the bad moments, you know. And so, just based on that, you may get the impression that everybody else is doing great, and you're the only one who's suffering all the time. And that, of course, is not true. And so, I think it's really, really important to keep a little bit of a distance. Mentally and emotionally to that because it's so easy to get frustrated when you always only look at the people who have more success than you have or are more advanced as producers already and that's the one thing and the other thing is with production I think it's one step at a time really you know it's you I think what's important is and I'm from a generation who was in my view, kind of lucky with this kind of stuff. When I started out, there was no Instagram, there was no Facebook, there was no SoundCloud, and so we had the time to develop whatever music we wanted to do without the pressure of having to upload something new tomorrow. You know, and I think it's important for everybody who's starting to allow themselves the time to grow and at some moment the right time will come to go out and present it but I don't think it's necessary to present it too early and you can put so much pressure on yourself to be ready tomorrow but maybe you're only ready in 1 year or 2 years or 3 years and that's okay you know everybody it takes time to properly get into it and to properly learn all this kind of stuff and then when it's time to go out and present it of course I don't want to say that I don't like social media, for example. I mean, it has its problems and downsides, but for an independent artist, it's also a really great platform and a really great tool to present yourself and to communicate with other people around the planet, basically. And so it's great to use it, but I think I think the most important thing is to just basically allow yourself some space, some safe space, and some time to grow before uh, yeah you jump into the shark tank and try to swim between all the big fishes.
Yes, social media, it's complicated when we start to compare ourselves with other talented artists. So I think something that is clear and it's the best advice that you gave to us, it's that we have to take more time. Also in the creative process, also in social media, we need to be more with ourselves and take the time to develop our music projects.
Yeah, I mean this whole environment is just I think everybody is sending, everybody's transmitting messages all the time, you know, and this can become some sort of imbalance where you forget that this is not just about sending; it's also about receiving. And like I said with the track that I wrote on the beach in Bali, you know, this was only possible because I took myself out of this super fast cycle of sending and receiving and so many different transmissions crossing through my mind, and I think it's important to be ready to use all these opportunities and tools when you need them, but it's also really important to not lose yourself in them. And I think that's the most important advice that I can give to anybody who's starting, that uh, yeah, it's really important to find yourself and to not lose yourself.
Yeah, I think something to resume that it's we don't have to take care of the noise in our mix, also the noise in our head.
Yes, exactly.
Something similar.
Yes.
Well, I think it was a nice interview. Nice to meet you too. And no sé si
No,
quieren
estamos,
preguntar algo
estamos
más.
perfecto, perfecto, perfecto.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Excelente.
Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias.
Muy bueno.
Muy bueno, muchas gracias.
Un placer.
Igualmente.